The rope felt coarse against Abigail Morgan's neck. She stood motionless on the wooden platform, the afternoon sun beating down upon her worn calico dress. A crowd had gathered in Frontier Springs' town square, their faces a blur of curiosity, anger, and judgment. Some women clutched their children close as if her alleged crimes might be contagious. Abigail's eyes remained fixed on the distant mountains, their peaks scraping the Colorado sky. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear, though her heart thundered against her ribs. Judge Fuller, a man with a face like cracked leather, unfolded a piece of paper with deliberate slowness. The crowd hushed. Abigail Morgan. His voice boomed across the square. You stand convicted of falsely claiming medical expertise resulting in the death of Governor Harmon's son. For this crime of criminal negligence and fraud, you are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Abigail closed her eyes. The wind carried the scent of dust and sage. In her mind, she saw her son's face, his golden curls catching the light. I'll be with you soon, my sweet boy. The executioner adjusted the noose. Someone in the crowd shouted, Get on with it! The drum roll began, each beat matching her racing pulse. Then hoofbeats growing louder. A commotion at the edge of the crowd. Stop the execution! A man's voice bellowed. Abigail's eyes flew open. A rider on a chestnut stallion pushed through the throng, waving a paper above his head. Dust swirled around horse and rider as they came to a halt before the platform. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard streaked with silver, and eyes as hard as flint. A stranger to Abigail, yet there was something in his determined stance that kindled a flicker of hope in her chest. I have a stay of execution, he announced, handing the document to the sheriff. By order of Judge Carlton of Denver. Judge Fuller scowled. On what grounds? New evidence. The stranger's gaze met Abigail's for the first time, and something passed between them. Not recognition, but understanding. The crowd murmured. The sheriff examined the document, then nodded reluctantly. Remove the prisoner, he ordered. As the noose was lifted from her neck, Abigail's legs gave way. The stranger caught her arm, steadying her. Who are you? She whispered. A friend, he replied simply. Now isn't the time for explanations. As they led her away, Abigail looked back at the gallows silhouetted against the setting sun. She had been moments from death, but for what purpose had she been spared? 6 months earlier, the journey to Frontier Springs had taken every last cent Abigail possessed. She sat atop the stagecoach, the harsh wind whipping her dark hair across her face. Her hands, once soft and genteel, were now roughened by months of hard labor and travel. In her lap rested a small leather satchel, all that remained of her former life. The rolling hills gave way to a valley cradling a small town. Frontier Springs was hardly more than a main street, a church spire and scattered buildings spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Beyond the town, ranches dotted the landscape, fence lines stretching toward the distant mountains. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the general store. As Abigail descended, she felt eyes upon her, curious glances from locals pausing in their daily routines to assess the newcomer. She straightened her threadbare shawl and lifted her chin. The name Ruth Walker sat uncomfortably on her shoulders like borrowed clothing, but it was her shield now. Abigail Morgan had died along with her husband and son in Virginia. Ruth Walker would find a way to survive. The general store's bell jingled as she entered. An older man looked up from behind the counter, his spectacles perched on his nose. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked. "I'm looking for work," Ruth replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Any families in need of help? Cooking, cleaning, childcare?" I'm capable at all of them. The shopkeeper studied her. His eyes, kind but shrewd, took in her worn clothes and the shadows beneath her eyes. You're new to these parts. Yes, sir. Just arrived. He nodded slowly. Name's Donovan. Martin Donovan. He extended his hand. Ruth Walker, she replied, taking it. A flicker of something recognition crossed his features but vanished just as quickly. There's a ranch outside town, Whispering Pines. Owner's name is Hayes. Nathaniel Hayes lost his wife 2 years back, has 2 young daughters. Last 3 housekeepers quit within a month. Donovan paused. He's a hard man. War changed him, folks say. Ruth nodded. Many men came back different. You know something about that, do you? His gaze sharpened. She looked away. Everyone lost something in the war. Donovan reached beneath the counter and produced a rough map sketched on brown paper. Follow the creek north for 2 miles. Can't miss it, big white house with blue shutters. He handed her the map. Tell Hayes that Martin sent you. Might help. Might not. Ruth folded the paper carefully. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Miss Walker, he called as she reached the door. Frontier Springs isn't always kind to strangers with secrets. She froze, then turned slowly. What makes you think I have secrets? The old man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Everyone who comes west does. Whispering Pines lived up to its name. Tall ponderosa pines surrounded the property, their needles rustling in the constant breeze. As Ruth approached the wrought iron gate, she paused to take in the sprawling ranch house. 2 stories of weathered white clapboard with a wraparound porch, blue shutters faded by years of sun and snow. Once it must have been magnificent. Now it bore the neglected look of a place maintained only out of necessity. The front garden had gone wild roses climbing haphazardly over trellises, weeds sprouting between flagstones. Yet someone had recently tended a small vegetable patch to the side of the house, straight rows of corn beans and pumpkins stretched toward the barn. Ruth pushed open the gate, wincing at its rusty creak. She had taken only 3 steps up the gravel path when a deep voice stopped her. We don't welcome peddlers or beggars. A man stood on the porch, rifle cradled in his arms, tall and lean with broad shoulders and a stern face half hidden by a dark beard. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-browned skin, regarded her with cold suspicion. Ruth stood her ground. I'm neither Mr. Hayes. My name is Ruth Walker. Mr. Donovan, from the general store, suggested you might be in need of household help. He studied her silently, taking in her worn dress, the small satchel, her steady gaze. I've had enough women come and go, he finally said. My daughters need stability, not another person who'll disappear at the first hardship. I'm not afraid of hardship, sir, Ruth replied, meeting his gaze evenly. And I need the work. Before Hayes could respond, a commotion erupted from the barn. A massive black stallion burst through the doors, dragging a frantic stable hand who clung desperately to the rope halter. Devil's got loose again, the man shouted. The horse reared powerful hooves, slashing the air. The stable hand lost his grip and tumbled to the ground. Free of restraint, the stallion charged directly toward Ruth. Hayes dropped his rifle and lunged down the porch steps. Get out of the way, he bellowed, but Ruth didn't move. She stood perfectly still as the massive animal thundered toward her, its eyes rolling white with fear and rage. As it neared, she slowly raised her hand, palm outward. Easy, she murmured. Her voice was low, soothing. Easy now. And the stallion slowed, nostrils flaring, ears flicking forward then back in confusion. You've been mistreated, she continued, not breaking eye contact with the animal. But I'm not here to hurt you. The horse snorted, pacing sideways but no longer charging. Ruth remained motionless except for her lips, which moved in what might have been a prayer. A strange warmth spread from her palm, not visible but palpable to her, as if the life force within the animal connected with her own. Gradually, the stallion stilled. It stretched its neck forward, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. Ruth slowly raised her hand to its muzzle. The horse's breath was warm against her palm. After a long moment, she gently took hold of the dragging lead rope. "There now," she whispered. "No one's going to harm you." The stable hand scrambled to his feet, gaping. Hayes stood frozen on the steps, astonishment evident in his face. "Devil doesn't let anyone touch him except me," he said, approaching cautiously. "How did you—" Ruth handed him the lead rope. "Animals know when you respect them. They sense intention." Hayes studied her with new interest. "Where did you learn to handle horses like that?" "My father raised them, before the war." She looked toward the house. "About the position, Mr. Hayes?" He hesitated, then nodded curtly. 2-week trial. You'll be responsible for the house meals and helping with my daughters. Sophie's 7, Emma's 4. Pay is room board and $15 a month. "That's acceptable." "Richardson," Hayes called. The older man who had been tending the garden straightened up, his weathered face set in a permanent frown beneath a shock of white hair. "Show Miss Walker to the housekeeper's room. Then have her meet Sophie and Emma." As Hayes led the stallion back to the barn, Ruth released the breath she'd been holding. The first hurdle cleared. Richardson eyed her suspiciously as he led her to the house. "Don't get too comfortable," he muttered. "They never stay long." "Why is that?" Ruth asked. The old man glanced toward the barn where Hayes had disappeared. "Some wounds can't be seen, miss." He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. "The invisible ones are always the deepest." The housekeeper's room was small but clean, tucked at the back of the house next to the kitchen. A narrow bed, a washstand, with a cracked mirror, a pine dresser, and a chair by the window overlooking the garden. Ruth set her satchel on the bed, fighting a wave of exhaustion. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember a different room, a different life. A Boston brownstone with velvet curtains and mahogany furniture. Medical textbooks stacked on her husband's desk. Her son's wooden rocking horse by the fireplace. Gone, all gone. Ruth opened the satchel and removed 3 items: a worn Bible, a small medical kit rolled in canvas, and a lock of golden hair tied with blue ribbon. She placed the Bible and medical kit in the dresser drawer. The lock of hair she held to her lips for a moment, then tucked it beneath her pillow. Night had fallen by the time she finished unpacking. Ruth stood by the window, watching moonlight silver the pines. The vastness of the Colorado sky, crowded with stars, made her feel impossibly small. "God has a plan for all of us," she whispered, remembering her mother's words. "But I still don't understand your plan for me." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Ruth opened the door to find Richardson. "Mr. Hayes says to meet the children before they retire," he said stiffly. She followed him upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. Hayes stood in the doorway, watching as 2 small figures prepared for bed. He nodded at Ruth, then stepped aside to let her enter. The nursery was spacious but sparse. 2 beds with patchwork quilts. A bookshelf with few books. A chest of toys closed tight. No pictures on the pale blue walls. Nothing to suggest the personality of its occupants. Except for the window seat where dozens of paper birds hung from strings, delicate origami cranes in varying shades of blue and white. "Sophie, Emma, this is Miss Walker," Hayes said. "She'll be taking care of the house and helping with your lessons." The younger child, Emma, looked up from her doll with curious eyes. A cherub face framed by unruly brown curls, she had her father's startling blue gaze. "Do you know any stories?" she asked immediately. "Emma," Hayes warned, but Ruth smiled. "Yes, I know many stories. Would you like to hear one tomorrow?" Emma nodded eagerly. Ruth turned to the older girl who sat perfectly still on her bed, hands folded in her lap. Sophie's hair was darker than her sister's, nearly black, and hung in a neat braid down her back. Her eyes, large and solemn, studied Ruth carefully. "Hello, Sophie," Ruth said gently. The child did not respond. She looked to her father, then back at Ruth, but remained silent. "Sophie doesn't speak." Hayes explained, a protective edge to his voice. "Not since her mother died." Ruth nodded, meeting Sophie's gaze with understanding rather than pity. "That's all right. Sometimes words aren't necessary." The girl's expression remained guarded, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of interest. "Time for bed," Hayes announced. He bent to kiss each daughter's forehead, his movements awkward but tender. This reserved man clearly loved his children, even if he struggled to show it. "We'll get acquainted properly tomorrow," Ruth told the girls. "Sleep well." As they left the nursery, Hayes paused in the hallway. "My daughters are everything to me, Miss Walker. They've already lost their mother. I won't have them becoming attached to someone who'll abandon them at the first opportunity." "I understand, Mr. Hayes. Do you—" His eyes searched hers. "Sophie hasn't spoken in 2 years. She was there when my wife collapsed. The doctor said it was her heart, but I think it broke Sophie's too." Ruth felt a pang of empathy. "Children are more resilient than we think, Mr. Hayes. Sometimes they just need permission to heal." He regarded her with surprise, then suspicion. "You speak as if from experience." "Observation," she replied carefully. "I've worked with many families." Hayes studied her a moment longer, then nodded curtly. "Breakfast at 6. The girls' lessons begin at 8. After he left, Ruth returned to her room, her mind filled with the image of Sophie's watchful eyes and the paper birds fluttering in the night breeze. 2 wounded children in a house of silence, and their father carrying invisible scars of his own. She knelt beside her bed, clasped her hands, and prayed not for herself, but for them. Ruth woke before dawn, her body accustomed to early rising from years of nursing wounded soldiers. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, faded brown cotton with a white collar, and twisted her dark hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The kitchen was cold, the stove unlit. Ruth built a fire and set water to boil for coffee. As she worked, she surveyed her domain. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, but showed signs of neglect. Copper pots needed polishing, the floor needed scrubbing, and the pantry was haphazardly organized. By the time Hayes entered at precisely 6 o'clock, Ruth had prepared a breakfast of cornmeal mush, bacon, and biscuits. Coffee steamed in a blue enamel pot. He paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You've been busy." "It's what you hired me for," Ruth replied, placing a plate at the head of the table. Hayes sat down watching as she poured his coffee. "The girls will be down shortly. Richardson usually brings them. I can fetch them if you'd prefer." He hesitated, then nodded. "Second door on the right at the top of the stairs. Sophie will be awake. Emma sleeps like the dead." Ruth found Sophie exactly as Hayes had predicted, fully dressed, and sitting on the edge of her bed, staring out the window. Emma, however, was a tangle of limbs and bedclothes, brown curls splayed across the pillow. "Good morning, Sophie," Ruth said. The girl didn't respond, but her eyes followed Ruth as she moved to Emma's bed. "Time to wake up, little one." Emma burrowed deeper under the quilt. Ruth smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "I smell bacon," she whispered conspiratorially. "And I made biscuits with honey." One eye peeked open. "Real honey, the very same bees make." Ruth helped the child sit up. "Let's get you dressed. Your father's waiting." And to Sophie she said, "Would you like to help your sister with her buttons? You have such nimble fingers." She gestured to the origami birds. "Did you make those? They're beautiful." Sophie hesitated, then nodded once. She slid off her bed and came to help Emma, her small fingers working the pearl buttons efficiently. "Thank you," Ruth said, as if it were the most natural conversation in the world. "Now shall we go down? I heard your stomach growl, Emma. I think it's speaking bear language." Emma giggled. Even Sophie's lips quirked slightly. Hayes looked up as they entered the kitchen, his eyes widening fractionally at the sight of Emma holding Ruth's hand, and Sophie following close behind. "Papa, Miss Walker says my tummy speaks bear," Emma announced, climbing onto her chair. "Does it now?" Hayes glanced at Ruth, who was helping Sophie into her seat. "Indeed, all stomachs do when they're hungry, especially little girls' stomachs." "And Papa's?" Emma asked. "Oh, Papa's stomachs speak grisly, much deeper." Ruth demonstrated a comically low growl that made Emma dissolve into giggles and even brought a ghost of a smile to Hayes's stern face. As they ate, Ruth noticed Sophie watching her intently. The child hadn't touched her food. "The birds in your room," Ruth said gently. "They're paper cranes, aren't they? I once knew a Japanese woman who made those. She said each one is a wish." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. She gave a tiny nod. "Do they ever come true? The wishes?" The girl's gaze dropped to her plate. She picked up her spoon and began to eat, but Ruth saw the shadow that crossed her young face. After breakfast, Hayes left for the fields, instructing Ruth to continue the girl's education with reading and arithmetic. "They've had little formal schooling," he admitted. "Catherine started teaching them, but since then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ruth spent the morning assessing what the girls knew. Emma was bright and eager but easily distracted. Sophie was more advanced. She could read simple sentences and add numbers, though she communicated only by writing on a small slate. After lunch, Ruth took them to the garden. "Education isn't just books," she told them. "Today, we'll learn about plants." She showed them how to identify herbs, rosemary, thyme, sage, explaining their medicinal properties. "This one," she said, holding a sprig of lavender, "helps people sleep when they have bad dreams." Emma tugged her sleeve. "Sophie has bad dreams. She cries." Sophie shot her sister a sharp look. "Many people have bad dreams," Ruth said, "even grown-ups." "Does Papa?" Emma asked. Ruth thought of Hayes's haunted eyes. "Perhaps. Can lavender help Papa, too?" "It might. Shall we gather some and find out?" That afternoon, they collected herbs and flowers, making small sachets of lavender and rose petals. Ruth showed them how to tie the bundles with twine and place them under their pillows. As she worked, she felt that familiar warmth in her hands, the same sensation she'd experienced with Devil. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering a prayer of blessing over each sachet, her fingers tingling with a gentle energy that few could see, but many had experienced in her care. "And one for Papa," Emma insisted. Ruth hesitated. "Why don't you give it to him, Emma? It will mean more coming from you." That evening, as Hayes returned from the fields, Emma presented him with the small sachet, explaining its purpose with solemn importance. Hayes looked from the bundle to Ruth, who stood in the kitchen doorway. "Lavender aids sleep," she explained. "The girls made them this afternoon as part of their lessons." He turned the sachet over in his rough, calloused hands. Catherine used to grow lavender, he said quietly, then seemed surprised at his own admission. It's very hardy, Ruth replied, like the people who choose to grow it. Their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared resilience. Then Hayes cleared his throat. Richardson says you've rearranged the entire pantry. It needed organizing. Ruth returned to stirring the stew. Dinner will be ready shortly. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into silence, Ruth sat by her window watching moonlight silver the pines. She opened her small medical kit and inventoried its contents: bandages, scissors, laudanum, various dried herbs, a stethoscope, and a small journal filled with her handwritten notes on treatments and remedies. A sound from outside drew her attention. Hayes stood in the garden smoking a pipe, his face tilted toward the stars. In the moonlight, he looked younger, the sternness momentarily gone from his features. He held something in his hand, the lavender sachet Emma had given him. Ruth watched as he lifted it to his face, inhaling its scent. Then he tucked it into his shirt pocket directly over his heart. Days passed, settling into a rhythm. Ruth rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, managed the household, taught the girls, and slowly brought order to the chaos of whispering pines. Hayes remained reserved, but his initial suspicion began to thaw. Richardson, too, began to soften toward her. One morning, as Ruth was hanging laundry, the old man approached with a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden. "You're doing good work here, miss," he said gruffly. "The house hasn't been this clean since Mrs. Hayes was alive. And the girls?" He glanced toward the porch where Sophie and Emma were practicing their letters. "They're different since you came." "Thank you, Mr. Richardson," Ruth replied, surprised by the compliment. "Just Richardson, miss." He hesitated. "I was hard on you when you arrived. Seen too many come and go, breaking those girls' hearts each time." His weathered face creased in a reluctant smile. "But you're made of sterner stuff, I think." Ruth returned his smile. "I've had practice at enduring." The old man nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "Haven't we all?" he murmured before turning back to his garden. That afternoon, Ruth was teaching the girls about the Civil War sanitized for young ears when Sophie suddenly pushed forward her slate. On it, she had written, "Was Papa a soldier?" Ruth hesitated. "That's a question for your father," she said gently. Emma piped up. "Papa had a uniform. I saw it once in his trunk. It had shiny buttons." Later, Ruth found Hayes in the study reviewing the ranch accounts. She knocked softly on the open door. "Mr. Hayes, may I speak with you?" He looked up, brow furrowed. "Is something wrong with the girls?" "No, they're fine. They're pressing wildflowers in books." Ruth stepped into the room. "Sophie asked about your military service today." Hayes stiffened. "What did you tell her?" "That she should ask you." Children are naturally curious about their parents' lives. He set down his pen. "They don't need to know about the war." "With respect, Mr. Hayes, they already know pieces." "Emma mentioned your uniform." Hayes stood abruptly and moved to the window, his back to Ruth. Outside, the mountains rose against a clear blue sky. "I don't speak of the war," he said finally. "Not to anyone." "I understand." He turned eyes sharp. "Do you—" Ruth met his gaze steadily. "More than you might think." A charged silence filled the room. Hayes studied her as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "You're an educated woman," he said at last. "Your speech, your manner with the girls, you've had schooling beyond what most housekeepers receive." Ruth tensed. "My father valued education." What brought you to Frontier Springs, Miss Walker? The truth. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Hayes moved to the window. "We have a visitor," he said, his voice suddenly cold. "Everett Gibson." Ruth followed his gaze. A man in an expensive suit was dismounting from a sleek black horse. Even from a distance, she could sense an aura of authority and privilege. "Who is he?" she asked, though a chill of recognition had already whispered through her veins. "President of the Frontier Bank and Mining Company. Owns half the businesses in town." Hayes's jaw tightened. "And has his eye on Whispering Pines." "For what purpose? The railroad's coming through. Gibson's backing it." He turned to Ruth. "Stay with the girls. Keep them inside." Ruth nodded and left. But as she headed upstairs, she caught a glimpse of Gibson through the front window. Something about his confident stride, the tilt of his head, the silver at his temples, stirred a distant memory. A cold dread settled in her stomach. She had seen this man before in a Virginia courtroom sitting beside Governor Harmon as her husband fought for their land. The man who had watched with cold eyes as Thomas presented evidence of the boundary dispute. The man who had whispered in Harmon's ear just before the governor's face darkened with rage. The man who had destroyed her life. Martin Donovan was closing his store when the bell above the door jangled. He looked up to see Samuel Jenkins, the town pharmacist, entering with a bundle of letters. "Evening delivery," Jenkins announced. "Thought I'd save the postboy a trip." "Appreciate it, Samuel." Donovan sorted through the mail. "How's business?" "Steady. Had an interesting visitor today." Jenkins lowered his voice. "New housekeeper from Hayes's ranch. Came in asking for herbs. Knew exactly what she wanted: valerian root, chamomile, willow bark." Donovan paused. "Miss Walker." "That's the one. Spoke about the medicinal properties with surprising knowledge." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Not typical for a housekeeper." "No," Donovan agreed, his expression thoughtful. "It's not. Got me thinking about a nurse I heard of during the war. They called her the Angel of Winchester. Had a gift for healing, they said. Could sense what ailed a soldier just by touching him." Donovan's eyes sharpened. "What was her name?" "Morgan, I believe. Abigail Morgan." Jenkins rubbed his chin. "I was stationed at a field hospital outside Richmond when they brought her husband in. Surgeon. Good man. Didn't make it." He paused. "Heard she had a son, too. Lost him after the war during some land dispute." "Tragic," Donovan murmured. "Indeed. The woman disappeared after that." Jenkins headed for the door. "Probably nothing to do with our Miss Walker. But interesting coincidence, don't you think? Both knowledgeable about medicine." After Jenkins left, Donovan locked the door and moved to the back of the store. From a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, he removed a wooden box. Inside lay a yellowed newspaper clipping with a sketch of a woman tending wounded soldiers. The headline read, "Angel of Winchester, Surgeon's Wife, Saves Hundreds on Battlefield." The woman in the drawing, though younger and in different circumstances, bore a striking resemblance to Ruth Walker. Donovan carefully returned the clipping to the box. "So you've come west at last," he murmured. "The question is, who else knows you're here?" Ruth couldn't sleep. Gibson's visit had left the entire household on edge. Hayes had been tight-lipped about their conversation, but his thunderous expression told enough. She lit a small lamp and moved to the window. The moon hung low over the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. In the distance, an owl called mournfully. A sound from the hallway made her pause. Footsteps, heavy and uneven, followed by a thud and muttered curse. She opened her door to find Hayes leaning against the wall, a half-empty whiskey bottle dangling from his fingers. Mr. Hayes. He straightened clearly, struggling to focus. Miss Walker, apologies for the disturbance. Are you all right? Perfectly. His attempt at dignity was undermined by a slight sway. Just checking the house. Ruth stepped closer, concern overriding propriety. Let me help you to your room. Don't need help, he muttered, but didn't resist when she took his arm and guided him down the hall. Hayes's room was spartanly furnished, a large bed with rumpled sheets, a dresser, a chair by the fireplace. No personal items adorned the walls or surfaces, save for a daguerreotype on the bedside table, a woman with Sophie's dark hair and Emma's smile. Ruth helped Hayes to the bed. As he sat heavily on the edge, the whiskey bottle slipped from his grasp. She caught it before it could spill. Gibson wants my land, Hayes said suddenly. Offered triple its value. Ruth set the bottle aside. That's generous. It's theft disguised as generosity. His words were slurred, but his eyes burned with anger. My grandfather built this ranch. My father expanded it. I fought in a goddamned war to preserve it. He looked up at her. Would you sell your heritage, Miss Walker? The question struck too close to home. Ruth turned away. I have no heritage left to sell. Hayes fell silent. When she glanced back, he was staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Who are you? He asked softly. Really? Someone trying to rebuild a life, she answered truthfully. As I suspect you are. He laughed bitterly. There's no rebuilding what's been destroyed. Perhaps not, but we can plant new seeds in scorched earth. She thought of her garden in Virginia, how the flowers had returned after the fire. Life finds a way to begin again, even after devastation. Hayes's expression softened. For a moment, the hardness left his face, revealing the man he might have been before grief and war carved their lines. You should rest, Ruth said gently. Things often look clearer in the morning light. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. His grip was warm, calloused from ranch work, but not rough. Thank you, he said. For the girls. They're different since you came. Emma laughs again. And yesterday I could swear Sophie almost spoke. Ruth felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Children are resilient. They want to heal. And adults. His blue eyes, though clouded by whiskey, searched hers. Adults. Ruth carefully extracted her hand from his. Adults often get in their own way. Hayes nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd long suspected. Good night, Mr. Hayes. Nathaniel, he said. My name is Nathaniel. Ruth paused at the door. Good night, Nathaniel. She closed the door quietly behind her, her hand still tingling where he had touched it. The next morning, Hayes Nathaniel was gone before breakfast, leaving word with Richardson that he'd be checking the north pasture fences. Ruth suspected he was avoiding her after the previous night's vulnerability. She focused on the household tasks and the girls' lessons. By afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, promising a summer storm. Ruth moved the lessons to the parlor, where large windows provided ample light for reading. Today we're going to learn about the human body, she told the girls. How it works and how to care for it. She had drawn simple diagrams of the heart, lungs, and circulation system. As she explained how blood carried oxygen throughout the body, Sophie leaned forward, clearly fascinated. The girl wrote on her slate, Does the heart really pump blood? Yes, it's a muscle. Here, let me show you. Ruth took Sophie's small hand and placed it over the child's own heart. Feel that? That's your heart working. As their hands connected, Ruth felt that now familiar warmth flowing through her palm. For an instant, she could sense Sophie's heartbeat, as if it were her own strong, steady, but carrying an echo of old grief, like a shadow across the sun. Sophie nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "Can I feel mine too?" Emma asked excitedly. Ruth guided her hand. "There, that's your strong, healthy heart." A sudden clap of thunder made both girls jump. Rain began to lash against the windows. "Will Papa be all right?" Emma asked worriedly. "Your father knows these storms," Ruth reassured her. "He'll seek shelter." As if summoned by their conversation, the front door burst open. Nathaniel strode in, drenched and mud-splattered, his expression grim. "Miss Walker," he said curtly. "A word." In the hallway, he spoke in a low voice. "Richardson found poisonous weeds in the south pasture where the cattle graze. I need to move the herd before they're sickened." In this storm, lightning flashed, illuminating his determined face. "I don't have a choice. Richardson and the hands are already there. I came back for my oilskin." He glanced toward the parlor. "Keep the girls occupied. I'll return when I can." Before Ruth could protest, he was gone, the door slamming behind him. The hours crept by. Ruth fed the girls dinner, helped them bathe, and settled them into bed with stories of brave knights and clever princesses. Throughout, she maintained a calm demeanor, though worry gnawed at her. "When will Papa come back?" Emma asked sleepily. "Soon," Ruth promised. "The rain's already letting up." After the girls were asleep, Ruth paced the kitchen. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 10, then 11. The storm had passed, but Nathaniel hadn't returned. Finally, unable to bear the waiting, she donned a cloak and lit a lantern. The night air was cool and fresh after the rain, the stars beginning to peek through dissipating clouds. Mud sucked at her boots as she made her way toward the barn. A horse nickered softly as she entered Devil the black stallion. The animal seemed restless, moving nervously in his stall. "You sense something's wrong, too, don't you?" Ruth murmured, stroking his velvet muzzle. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. A rider appeared in the barn doorway. Richardson, his weathered face etched with concern. "Miss Walker, what are you doing out here? Mr. Hayes hasn't returned. I was concerned." Richardson dismounted stiffly. "He sent us back an hour ago. Said he'd follow once he checked the west fence." The old man frowned. "He should have been here by now." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through Ruth. Could he have been thrown or caught in a flash flood? "Hayes is the best rider in the county, but in this darkness—" Richardson shook his head. "I'll gather some men." "No time," Ruth interrupted. "Which way is the west fence? You can't be thinking of going after him yourself." She was already moving toward Devil's stall. "I need to borrow a horse." "Take mine. Devil's half wild." But Ruth had already entered the stall. The stallion snorted, but allowed her to slip a bridle over his head. There was no time for a saddle. "Miss Walker, this is madness." Perhaps, she conceded, leading Devil out. "But I have experience finding lost men in worse conditions than this." She mounted in one fluid motion, years of childhood riding, returning to her muscles. "If Mr. Hayes isn't back by morning, send for the doctor." Before Richardson could protest further, Ruth urged Devil forward. The stallion sprang into the night, powerful muscles bunching beneath her as they raced across the moonlit pasture. She rode west, following the fence line, scanning the shadows for any sign of Nathaniel. The land undulated in gentle hills, silvered by moonlight. In the distance, the creek that gave Whispering Pines its name had swollen with rainwater gurgling loudly over rocks. Ruth slowed Devil as they approached the water. "Nathaniel," she called, her voice carried away by the breeze. A faint response so soft she thought she'd imagined it drifted from the direction of the creek. She dismounted, tethered Devil to a fence post, and made her way carefully down the slippery bank. The creek had carved away part of the earth, creating a small ravine. And there at the bottom lay Nathaniel Hayes. His horse was nowhere to be seen, and even in the dim light Ruth could tell his leg was bent at an unnatural angle. "Mr. Hayes." She scrambled down, heedless of the mud that caked her skirts. He looked up, his face pale with pain. "Miss Walker, what the devil are you doing out here? Looking for you, obviously." She knelt beside him, medical training taking over. "What happened?" She closed her eyes, placing her hands gently on either side of the break. That familiar warmth began to flow through her fingers, a gift she'd possessed since childhood, but had honed during the war. As the sensation intensified, she could visualize the damage beneath skin and muscle, like seeing with her hands instead of her eyes. The broken bone edges were clean, thankfully not splintered, with minimal damage to surrounding tissue. Abigail focused her energy, directing the warmth deeper. Nathaniel gasped softly. "What was that?" he asked, surprise momentarily overriding his pain. "Just assessing the damage," she murmured, not opening her eyes. She couldn't fully heal such a serious injury. Her gift had limitations, but she could ease the inflammation, reduce the pain, and begin the healing process. After a moment, she withdrew her hands. "Broken," she confirmed. "But a clean break. I've stabilized it somewhat, but you'll need proper medical attention." She tore a strip from her petticoat and used it to bind a sturdy branch to his leg as a splint. "The pain. It's different now," Nathaniel said with a hint of wonder. "Still there, but muted somehow." "Good," she said, simply avoiding further explanation. "That will help us get you home. Can you stand with help?" "Do I have a choice?" Despite his pain, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Together, they managed to get him upright, his arm around her shoulders. The climb back to level ground was arduous, with Nathaniel biting back groans at each step. Devil watched their approach with wary eyes. "You rode my stallion," Nathaniel said, amazement temporarily overriding his pain. "No one rides Devil but me." "We came to an understanding." Ruth helped him to a fallen log. "Now comes the hard part. You need to mount." Nathaniel stared at her. "With a broken leg, impossible. I've seen men with worse injuries ride miles to safety." Her voice took on an authority that surprised even her. "I'll help you up, then mount behind you to keep you stable." He studied her face. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, but Ruth nodded anyway. "In another life." With grim determination and considerable pain, Nathaniel managed to mount Devil. Ruth swung up behind him, one arm around his waist to steady him. "Hold on," she murmured, taking the reins with her free hand. The ride back was slow and torturous. Nathaniel's body was rigid with pain, but he never cried out. Ruth kept up a soothing stream of words to him, to Devil, perhaps to herself, as they made their way through the moonlit landscape. When they finally reached the barn, Richardson and 2 ranch hands were preparing to search. "Mr. Hayes, get Doc Turner," Ruth ordered as they helped Nathaniel down. "Clean break of the right tibia." If the men were surprised by her medical terminology, they didn't show it. One mounted immediately and rode toward Town. By the time they got Nathaniel settled in his bed, dawn was breaking over the mountains. Ruth had cut away his muddy trouser leg and properly splinted the break. He watched her work with a mixture of pain and fascination. "You move like someone trained in medicine," he observed. "Your hands are sure." Ruth avoided his gaze. "I helped our town doctor sometimes before—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Before what?" She busied herself mixing a powder into water. Drink this. It will help with the pain until the doctor arrives. Nathaniel took the cup, but didn't drink. You risked your life coming after me. I did what anyone would do. No. His blue eyes clear despite the pain fixed on hers. Not anyone. You. Ruth felt heat rise to her cheeks. She took the empty cup from his hands, her fingers brushing his. Rest now, she said softly. The doctor will be here soon. As she turned to leave, he caught her wrist. Thank you, Ruth. The sound of her assumed name on his lips sent a pang through her chest. What would he think, if he knew the truth, that she was Abigail Morgan, a woman fleeing her past, a mother who couldn't save her own child? You're welcome, she replied gently, freeing herself. Sleep if you can. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving her hollow. Miss Walker. Sophie stood at the end of the hall in her nightgown, dark eyes wide with concern. Is Papa hurt? Ruth straightened, summoning a reassuring smile. Yes, but he'll be fine. He broke his leg, but the doctor is coming. Sophie nodded solemnly, then held out her hand. In it was a paper crane, pure white, perfectly folded. For Papa, she whispered, her voice so soft, Ruth almost didn't hear it. Ruth froze, her heart skipping a beat. Sophie, did you just… The child's eyes widened, as if she too was surprised by the sound of her own voice. Then, deliberately, she spoke again. For Papa's leg. A wish to heal. Ruth knelt and gathered the girl into her arms, tears stinging her eyes. Oh, Sophie, your Papa will be overjoyed to hear your voice again. Sophie hugged her back fiercely. Don't tell, she whispered. I want to surprise him. Ruth nodded, understanding the child's need to control this moment. It will be our secret, until you're ready. As Sophie returned to the nursery, Ruth looked down at the paper crane in her hand. A wish for healing. Perhaps that's what they all needed, Nathaniel with his war wounds, Sophie with her silence, Ruth with her hidden identity. And perhaps, just perhaps, Whispering Pines was where those wishes could come true. Dr. Turner arrived at Whispering Pines just after sunrise, his medical bag clutched in weathered hands. Ruth met him at the door, her face composed despite her exhaustion. Richardson says Hayes broke his leg, the doctor said by way of greeting. He was a portly man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. Yes, clean break of the right tibia, Ruth replied. I've splinted it and given him willow bark for the pain. Dr. Turner's bushy eyebrows rose. You seem knowledgeable for a housekeeper. Ruth felt a flicker of alarm, but maintained her calm demeanor. My father was injured often. I learned out of necessity. The doctor studied her for a moment, then nodded. Lead the way. Nathaniel was propped up in bed, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes alert. He attempted to sit straighter when they entered. Stay still, Dr. Turner commanded, setting his bag on the bedside table. Let's see what we're dealing with. Ruth moved to leave, but Nathaniel called her back. Stay, please. You're the one who found me, after all. Dr. Turner carefully unwrapped Ruth's makeshift splint. This is fine work, he commented. Military training. The question was directed at Ruth, who felt her heart stutter. As I said, my father had frequent injuries. The doctor humphed, but didn't press. After a thorough examination, he confirmed Ruth's diagnosis. Clean break. You're lucky, Hayes. Miss Walker's splint was perfect. He began rewrapping the leg with fresh bandages. 6 weeks minimum before you put weight on it. I'll check again in 2 weeks. 6 weeks? Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I have a ranch to run. You have men to help, Dr. Turner countered. and a very capable housekeeper, from what I've seen. As the doctor worked, Ruth noticed him watching her with professional curiosity. When their eyes met, he smiled slightly, not in suspicion, but in something like recognition between practitioners. After giving instructions for care and leaving powders for pain, the doctor packed up. Ruth accompanied him downstairs. At the door, Dr. Turner paused. "Miss Walker, I served as a field surgeon during the war. I've seen splints like yours before." His eyes, sharp beneath those bushy brows, assessed her. "If you ever want to discuss your particular talents, my door is always open." Ruth felt cold despite the morning warmth. "I don't know what you mean, doctor." "Don't you?" His voice softened. "I've seen gifted healers before, people whose hands seem to know more than their eyes tell them, people who can sense the nature of an injury through touch." He tapped his temple, had a nurse in Winchester who could diagnose infection before the first signs appeared, saved hundreds of men. Ruth's breath caught. What happened to her? Disappeared after the war. Shame, really. A gift like that shouldn't be hidden. He placed his hat on his head. "Just know that not everyone fears what they don't understand. Good day, Miss Walker." After he left, Ruth leaned against the door, her heart pounding. Two people now, Donovan and Dr. Turner, harbored suspicions about her past and her abilities. How long before someone recognized her completely? A small hand tugged at her skirt. Emma stood there in her nightgown, her brown curls tousled from sleep. "Is Papa going to die?" she asked, blue eyes wide with fear. Ruth knelt down. "No, sweetheart. Your Papa has a broken leg, that's all. He'll need to rest for a while, but he'll be just fine." "Can I see him?" "Of course. But remember, he needs quiet and calm." Emma nodded solemnly. Ruth took her hand and led her upstairs, where they found Sophie already sitting quietly by her father's bedside. The white paper crane rested on his nightstand. Nathaniel's face softened at the sight of his daughters. He opened his arms, and Emma scrambled carefully onto the bed beside him. "Papa, Miss Walker said you're going to be all right," she announced. "Did she now?" His gaze met Ruth's over the child's head. "Then it must be true." Sophie remained in her chair, but her hand reached out to touch her father's arm. Nathaniel covered it with his own. "Sophie made you a crane," Ruth said, picking up the delicate paper bird. "For healing." Nathaniel examined it with genuine appreciation. "It's beautiful. Thank you, Sophie." The girl ducked her head, but Ruth saw the pleased flush on her cheeks. Soon, Ruth thought Sophie would find the courage to speak to her father. The thought filled her with a warm sense of accomplishment. "Now," she said to the girls, "your papa needs rest. Let's make him some breakfast and let him sleep a while." After the girls had gone downstairs, Nathaniel caught Ruth's hand. "I remember what you did last night. Riding out alone, finding me, getting me home." His voice was low, intense. "That took courage." Ruth gently withdrew her hand. "It was nothing extraordinary." "We both know that's not true." His blue eyes searched her face. "Who are you, Ruth Walker?" "Really?" The question hung in the air between them. Ruth felt an almost overwhelming urge to tell him everything about Abigail Morgan, about her husband and son, about her gift for healing, and the tragedy that followed. But fear held her tongue. "Someone trying to make amends," she finally said, "for past failures." Nathaniel seemed about to press further when Richardson appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hayes," the old man said, "Samuel Jenkins is here to see you. Says it's urgent." Ruth excused herself, relieved by the interruption. She passed the pharmacist in the hallway, nodding politely. Samuel Jenkins returned the nod with a curious look that lingered a moment too long. Another person who suspected. The walls were closing in. Samuel Jenkins settled into the chair beside Nathaniel's bed, his angular frame at odds with the plush cushions. "You're looking better than Richardson described," he observed. "Miss Walker's doing, I hear." Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably. "She found me but brought me home. Doc says she did a fine job splinting the break." "Interesting." Jenkins stroked his neat beard. "Your housekeeper seems remarkably skilled in various areas. What brings you here?" Samuel Richardson said it was urgent. "Ah, yes." Jenkins leaned forward. "Everett Gibson was in my shop yesterday, asking questions about Whispering Pines and about your new housekeeper." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "What kind of questions?" "Where she came from, how long she's been here, whether she has family." Jenkins shrugged. "I told him what little I know, which isn't much." "Why would Gibson care about my housekeeper?" "That's what I wondered." Jenkins reached into his coat and withdrew a small newspaper clipping. "Until I remembered this." Nathaniel took the paper. It showed a crude sketch of a woman tending wounded soldiers with the headline, "Angel of Winchester Surgeon's Wife Saves Hundreds on Battlefield." "And during the war, there was a nurse," Jenkins explained. "Wife of a surgeon. They said she had a special gift, could sense what ailed a man just by touching him. Saved countless lives." He tapped the clipping. "Name was Morgan. Abigail Morgan." Nathaniel studied the drawing. Though the image was rough, the determined set of the woman's jaw, the graceful curve of her neck, and most tellingly, the compassionate eyes were unmistakably Ruth's. "You think this is Ruth? The resemblance is striking, don't you think? And she certainly knew how to treat your injury." Nathaniel handed back the clipping. "What happened to this Abigail Morgan?" Jenkins's expression darkened. "After the war, she and her husband settled in Virginia. But there was trouble land dispute with a powerful man. Her husband was killed. Their son died shortly after from fever." He tucked the paper away. "Abigail Morgan disappeared. Some said she went west." "And you think Gibson is looking for her?" "Why, that I don't know." Jenkins hesitated, then added, "But there's something you should know about Gibson. During the war, he made his fortune supplying the Union Army at inflated prices. My brother died at Winchester because Gibson's company delivered spoiled medicines." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "You have a personal grudge against him." "I have a personal reason to distrust him," Jenkins corrected. "Gibson didn't get where he is by being gentle with obstacles." He stood to leave. "Just be careful, Nathaniel, and perhaps keep an eye on your housekeeper." After the pharmacist left, Nathaniel lay back against his pillows, mind racing. Ruth Walker, or was it Abigail Morgan, had secrets, that much was clear. But weren't they all entitled to their pasts? He reached for the paper crane Sophie had made. The delicate wings seemed to capture the fragility of the piece they'd found at Whispering Pines, a piece now threatened by Gibson's machinations and Ruth's hidden history. What if Ruth was running from something, or someone? What would Gibson want with a widowed nurse? The questions tumbled through his mind, until exhausted from pain and lack of sleep, he drifted off the crane still clutched in his hand. The next few days established a new rhythm at Whispering Pines. With Nathaniel confined to bed, Ruth took on additional responsibilities. She consulted with Richardson about the ranch operations, reviewed the accounts Nathaniel normally managed, and continued the girl's education, all while maintaining her usual household duties. Richardson observed her efforts with a watchful eye. At first, his silence felt judgmental, but gradually Ruth noticed subtle changes. He began leaving freshly picked vegetables from his garden outside her door. When she struggled with a heavy water bucket, he appeared without a word to take it from her hands. Small gestures, but telling. One morning, as Ruth tended to Nathaniel's leg, Richardson entered with a stack of ledgers. Instead of handing them directly to his employer as usual, he set them before Ruth. "These need reviewing by noon," he said gruffly. "I'd do it myself, but my eyes ain't what they used to be." Ruth recognized the excuse for what it was, a tentative olive branch, a test of her competence. She nodded. "I'll see to it." That evening, when she returned the completed ledgers, Richardson examined her work with narrowed eyes. "You have a good head for figures," he admitted finally. "My husband was meticulous with his accounts," she replied. "I learned from him." Richardson studied her face. "Lost him in the war." "After," she said softly. The old man nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Lost my boy at Shiloh. Some wounds don't show on the outside." It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared with her. The next morning, as Ruth was hanging laundry, Richardson approached with a basket of fresh vegetables. "You're doing good work here, miss," he said. The gruffness in his voice softened slightly. "The house hasn't been this clean since Mrs. Hayes was alive. And the girls—" He glanced toward the porch where Sophie and Emma were practicing their letters. "They're different since you came." "Thank you, Mr. Richardson," Ruth replied, surprised by the compliment. "Just Richardson, miss." He hesitated. "I was hard on you when you arrived. Seen too many come and go, breaking those girls' hearts each time." His weathered face creased in a reluctant smile. "But you're made of sterner stuff, I think." Ruth returned his smile. "I've had practice at enduring." The old man nodded as if this confirmed something for him. "Haven't we all?" he murmured before turning back to his garden. As the days passed, Richardson became her staunch ally. He walked her through the cattle records, explained the rotation of grazing lands, and made sure the ranch hands respected her authority. "Never thought I'd take orders from a woman," he confided one evening as they reviewed the work schedule for the following week. "But you've got a good head on your shoulders, Miss Walker, and a good heart, too." The strain began to show in dark circles beneath Ruth's eyes, but she never complained. Each evening she would bring Nathaniel a report on the day's activities, sitting beside his bed as he asked questions and gave instructions. "You're doing too much," he told her one night, noticing how she stifled a yawn. "I'm managing," Ruth replied, reviewing the list she'd made for the next day. "You're exhausting yourself." He reached out his fingers lightly, touching her wrist. "The ranch won't fall apart if you rest occasionally." The unexpected gentleness in his voice made her look up. In the soft lamplight, his face seemed younger, the hard lines of authority softened by concern. "I'm fine, truly," she assured him, though her body ached with fatigue. "You're not fine. You're trying to prove something." His blue eyes were too perceptive. "But to whom, Ruth? To me? Or to yourself?" The question hit too close to home. Ruth stood abruptly. "It's late. You should rest." "Ruth," his voice stopped her at the door. "Whatever you're running from, or whoever, you don't have to face it alone." She didn't turn. "Some burdens can't be shared." "I disagree." His tone was quiet, but firm. "I've kept my own demons locked away for too long. It only makes their voices louder in the darkness." Ruth hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. For a moment, she was tempted to unburden herself to tell him everything, but the risk was too great. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." As she closed the door, she heard him sigh. "Good night, Abigail." Ruth froze, her heart stuttering. Had she heard correctly? Did he know? But no, he couldn't. It must have been her exhausted mind playing tricks. Still, as she prepared for bed, Ruth felt increasingly uneasy. Too many people were asking questions. Donovan, Dr. Turner, Samuel Jenkins, and now Gibson. The sanctuary she'd found at Whispering Pines was beginning to feel like a trap. That night she dreamed of fire and smoke, of a small body burning with fever in her arms, of a man's voice accusing, "You killed my son." She woke gasping, sheets twisted around her legs, her nightgown damp with sweat. For a moment, Ruth didn't know where she was. Then the familiar outlines of her small room at Whispering Pines emerged from the darkness, and she remembered. But the panic didn't subside. She needed air. Wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, Ruth slipped from her room and out the back door into the garden. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black velvet sky like diamond dust. She drew deep breaths of the cool air, willing her heart to slow. "Can't sleep." Ruth whirled to find Nathaniel sitting on a wooden bench beneath the elm tree, a crutch propped beside him. He wore a robe over his nightshirt, his splinted leg extended before him. "Mr. Hayes, you shouldn't be out of bed. I've been confined for 3 days. I was going mad." He gestured to the space beside him. "Join me. The stars are particularly fine tonight." Ruth hesitated, then sat careful to maintain a proper distance. "How did you manage the stairs?" she asked. "Painfully," he admitted with a wry smile. "But worth it for fresh air and decent company." They sat in silence for a time, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead. The only sounds were the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. "I used to do this during the war," Nathaniel said softly. "Slip away from camp to sit under the stars." Reminded me there was something larger than our human conflicts, something that would outlast all our petty struggles. Ruth nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I did the same. At the field hospitals, when the tents were full of suffering." She stopped, realizing her mistake. Nathaniel turned to her, his face half hidden in shadow. "Field hospitals," Ruth's mind raced. "I volunteered, briefly, rolled bandages, wrote letters for the wounded." "I see." His tone suggested he didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Instead, he looked back to the stars. "The war changed us all, didn't it? Those who fought, those who healed, those who waited at home." "Some wounds never fully heal," Ruth murmured, thinking of her own scars, invisible but deep. "No," Nathaniel agreed. "But perhaps they can be lived with." He shifted his splinted leg. "I was a sharpshooter, a sniper. I killed men from such distances they never saw my face." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Ruth sensed the pain beneath. "Some nights I see their faces in my dreams, though in reality they were just distant figures falling." Ruth understood the confession for what it was, an offering a piece of his closely guarded past, given freely. "During the Battle of Winchester," she said carefully, "I held a young boy as he died, no more than 16, wearing a uniform too large for him. He called me Mama at the end." She swallowed hard. "I see his face too sometimes, in the spaces between waking and sleeping." Nathaniel's hand found hers in the darkness. His touch was warm, strong, comforting. They sat together beneath the stars, two souls bearing witness to each other's pain, neither speaking further. Words weren't necessary. After a time, Ruth helped Nathaniel back to his room, supporting him on the stairs. At his door, he paused. "Thank you," he said, "for the company, for listening." "Thank you for trusting me with your memories," she replied. His eyes, shadowed in the dim hallway, studied her face. "Someday I hope you'll trust me with all of yours, Ruth." The use of her assumed name reminded her of the wall that still stood between them. She stepped back, breaking the moment. "Rest well, Mr. Hayes." "Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "I think we're beyond formalities now, don't you?" Despite herself, Ruth smiled. "Good night, Nathaniel." For the first time in years, when she returned to her bed, no nightmares came to disturb her sleep. The following afternoon, while Nathaniel napped and the girls practiced their letters, Ruth ventured into town to purchase supplies. She hitched the wagon herself, waving off Richardson's offer of help. "I need the air and exercise," she explained, "and Mr. Hayes gave me a list of items from the mercantile." In truth, she also wanted to speak with Martin Donovan privately. The shopkeeper clearly knew something about her past, and she needed to understand how much and whether she was in danger of exposure. Frontier Springs was bustling when she arrived. Women in calico dresses shopped for household goods. Men gathered outside the saloon, discussing cattle prices and weather forecasts. Children played hoops and jacks in the dusty street. Ruth drew the wagon to a halt outside Donovan's general store. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, she entered the bell above the door announcing her arrival. Martin Donovan looked up from sorting merchandise. "Miss Walker," he greeted her. "What brings you to town?" "Supplies for Whispering Pines." She handed him the list. "And I hoped we might speak privately, Mr. Donovan." The old man's eyes sharpened with interest. "Of course. Let me gather these items first." As he moved about the store, selecting flour, coffee, sugar, and other staples, Ruth noticed a newspaper on the counter. The headline caught her eye: "Railroad Survey Complete Construction to Begin This Fall." A map showed the proposed route cutting directly through Whispering Pines. "Quite the controversy," Donovan commented, following her gaze. "Some say it'll bring prosperity. Others worry about what we'll lose." "What do you think?" Ruth asked. "Progress has its price." Donovan placed a bag of coffee on the counter. "Question is, who pays it?" When he had assembled all the items on her list, Donovan led Ruth to a small office at the back of the store. He closed the door and gestured to a chair. "Now, what did you wish to discuss, Miss Walker, or should I say Mrs. Morgan?" Though she had suspected, he knew the direct confrontation still shocked her. Ruth's hands trembled in her lap. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Since the moment you walked into my store." Donovan sat behind his desk. "My son was at Winchester. Took a mini A-ball to the chest. The surgeons gave up on him, but a nurse refused to let him go. She held his hand all night, talking him through the fever." The old man's eyes grew distant with memory. "He said she had a gift, could sense where the infection was spreading, knew exactly what to do. He called her an angel, but not just for her kindness. He swore she had healing in her touch." Ruth's throat tightened. "Your son survived, thanks to you." Donovan leaned forward. "He described you perfectly, said you had the gentlest hands he'd ever felt, but a will of iron." Relief flooded through her. "You're not going to expose me." "Why would I? You saved my boy's life." Donovan's expression sobered. "But I'm not the one you need to worry about. Everett Gibson has been asking questions about you." "Gibson?" Ruth feigned ignorance. "The banker." "Much more than that. He owns half the businesses in Colorado Territory, has the governor's ear, and wants Hayes's land for the railroad." Donovan lowered his voice. "And he's connected to what happened to your family in Virginia." Ruth's heart seemed to stop. "How?" "Gibson was partners with Governor Harmon in railroad investments back east. When your husband's land was seized, it wasn't just about the boundary dispute. It was about the right-of-way for a planned railroad spur." Donovan's weathered face creased with anger. "My son heard things while recovering in Richmond. Gibson's name came up in connection with Harmon's land acquisition projects. Nasty business." The room spun around Ruth. "Are you saying my husband and son died for a railroad? I'm saying powerful men rarely let anything stand in their way, and Gibson is very powerful. Donovan hesitated. There's something else you should know. Your husband's medical license was revoked posthumously. Governor Harmon claimed he was practicing experimental treatments without approval. Your name was mentioned too, accusations of witchcraft, if you can believe it. That's absurd, Ruth whispered, though she had heard such whispers before. Of course it is, but it gave them a convenient excuse to seize your property after your husband's death and to discredit anyone who might speak against them. Donovan's eyes were grave. Gibson's not just after Hayes's land. He's afraid of what you know. Does he know who I am? He suspects. Samuel Jenkins has been asking questions too. The pharmacist, he served as a field surgeon, lost his brother at Winchester, might recognize you from the war. Ruth stood her legs unsteady. I need to leave Frontier Springs. Running won't solve the problem, Donovan cautioned. Gibson's reach is long. And besides, he hesitated. You've made a place for yourself at Whispering Pines. Hayes and those girls need you. The thought of leaving Sophie, Emma, and Nathaniel sent a pang through Ruth's heart. In just a few short weeks, they had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. What would you suggest? She asked. Be careful. Watch for Gibson's men. And perhaps... Donovan looked at her meaningfully. Trust Hayes with the truth. You might find an ally where you least expect it. Ruth thanked him and left her mind churning. As she loaded the supplies into the wagon, she felt eyes upon her. Looking up, she saw Everett Gibson himself emerging from the bank across the street. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His sharp eyes locked with hers, and a cold smile curved his lips. He raised his hat in mocking salute. Ruth quickly climbed onto the wagon and flicked the reins. As she drove out of town, her heart raced with fear and dawning realization. Gibson had recognized her. And now, like a cat with a cornered mouse, he was simply watching, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Ruth arrived back at Whispering Pines to find the house in an uproar. Emma was crying in the kitchen while Richardson paced anxiously. Sophie was nowhere to be seen. What's happened? Ruth demanded, dropping her parcels. Miss Sophie's missing, Richardson explained. Emma says they were playing hide-and-seek in the barn, but Sophie never came out. We've searched everywhere. How long has she been gone? Nearly 2 hours now. Ruth's mind raced. Does Mr. Hayes know? Not yet. Didn't want to worry him till we'd looked properly. Keep searching the outbuildings, Ruth instructed. I'll speak with Emma, then tell Mr. Hayes. Kneeling beside the sobbing child, Ruth gently took her hands. Emma, sweetheart, I need you to be brave and tell me exactly what happened. Between hiccups, Emma explained. We were playing, and Sophie said she found a special hiding place, where I'd never find her. Fresh tears spilled. But I looked everywhere, Miss Ruth. Everywhere. Did Sophie say anything else? Anything at all about where she might go? Emma thought hard, her small face scrunched in concentration. She said it was a place with music. Music, Ruth repeated, puzzled. Emma nodded vigorously. She said it was Papa's secret place, where Mama used to play. Ruth's breath caught. A memory surfaced, Nathaniel mentioning that his late wife had played an instrument. Piano, no, he hadn't specified. Emma, did your Mama play music? Violin, the child answered. She played violin in the special room. What special room? The one behind the bookcase in Papa's study. It's a secret. Ruth's heart leapt. "Stay here with Richardson," she instructed, already moving toward the stairs. "I think I know where Sophie is." Nathaniel was attempting to review ranch accounts when Ruth burst into his room without knocking. "Sophie's missing," she said without preamble. "Emma says she might be in a hidden room where Catherine used to play violin. Behind a bookcase in your study." Nathaniel's face drained of color. He threw aside the ledger and reached for his crutches. "I should have known," he muttered. "She found the latch last month. I showed her the room, but made her promise not to go in there alone." Together, they made their way to his study, a handsome room lined with bookshelves. Nathaniel limped to the far wall and pressed a hidden mechanism. With a soft click, a section of shelving swung outward, revealing a small chamber beyond. The hidden room was exquisite walls paneled in rich cherry wood, a single window overlooking the mountains, a piano in one corner, and a violin case on a velvet-covered table. The space was filled with the golden light of late-afternoon dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. And there, curled in a window seat, fast asleep, with tears dried on her cheeks, was Sophie. Ruth exhaled in relief. "Thank God." Nathaniel leaned heavily on his crutches, his own relief evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Catherine's music room," he explained quietly. "After she died, I sealed it up. Couldn't bear to hear music anymore. It was like trying to capture an echo in a jar. The notes were there, but the soul behind them was gone." Ruth approached the sleeping child, gently stroking her dark hair. Sophie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw them, she sat up quickly, her expression fearful. "Am I in trouble?" she whispered. The sound of her voice clearly startled Nathaniel. He stared at his daughter in astonishment. "Sophie, you're speaking again." The girl nodded shyly. "Miss Ruth helped me remember how." Nathaniel's eyes met Ruth's over Sophie's head, filled with gratitude and something deeper, more complex. "You're not in trouble," he assured Sophie, moving to sit beside her on the window seat. "But you frightened us disappearing like that. Why did you come here?" Sophie touched the violin case reverently. "I wanted to hear Mama's music again. In my head." Her small face crumpled. "I miss her, Papa." Nathaniel gathered his daughter into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I miss her, too, little one. Every day." Ruth felt like an intruder witnessing this intimate moment. She moved to leave, but Sophie called out, "Don't go, Miss Ruth." The child extended her hand. "You're part of our family now, too." Family. The word pierced Ruth's heart like an arrow. How long had it been since she'd belonged anywhere, since she'd had people who needed her not just for her healing abilities, but for herself? Nathaniel looked up, his blue eyes holding hers. "Stay," he said simply. Ruth hesitated, then crossed the room to join them on the window seat. Sophie immediately took her hand, forming a chain of connection between the three of them. For a long moment they sat together in the golden light, a tableau of healing. Not perfect, not whole, but beginning to mend. "Can we open the piano, Papa?" Sophie asked. "Miss Ruth might play for us." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Do you play, Ruth?" "A little," she admitted. "My mother taught me." "Please," Sophie's dark eyes pleaded. Ruth moved to the piano, running her fingers over the ivory keys. It had been years since she'd played, not since before the war, before her life had shattered. But her fingers remembered. She began with a simple hymn, Amazing Grace, the notes flowing like water. Sophie leaned against her father, listening intently. By the third verse, the child's sweet voice joined in singing the familiar words. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Nathaniel watched them both, his expression softening. When the song ended, he cleared his throat. "Catherine would have wanted this room filled with music again," he said. "It was wrong of me to lock it away." We often seal off places of pain, Ruth said gently, like closing a door on winter. But spring finds its way in, eventually, through the smallest cracks. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Both had sealed away parts of themselves after lost Nathaniel, this room, Ruth, her very identity. Both were now cautiously opening doors long kept shut. As they left the music room, Ruth, supporting Nathaniel on one side and holding Sophie's hand with the other, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if despite all the danger and uncertainty surrounding her, she had somehow found her way home. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into silence, Ruth sat at her window, watching the stars. The encounter with Gibson in town had shaken her more than she cared to admit. His knowing smile, the malicious gleam in his eye. He was a predator who enjoyed toying with his prey. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Nathaniel standing there, leaning on his crutches. "May I come in?" he asked. Propriety dictated she refuse, but Ruth found herself stepping aside. Nathaniel entered his gaze, taking in the sparse furnishings, the open Bible on her nightstand, the small leather satchel half hidden under her bed. "I wanted to thank you," he said, turning to face her, "for finding Sophie today, for helping her speak again." "I did very little," Ruth demurred. "Sophie found her own voice when she was ready. You gave her the safety to try." Nathaniel moved closer. "You've brought life back to this house, Ruth. Not just order and cleanliness, but something more vital, hope." His proximity made her heart beat faster. In the lamplight, his blue eyes were dark and intense. "I should be thanking you," she said, "for giving me a place here. Is that all it is to you? Just a place?" His voice was low, the question pointed. Ruth looked away. "It's become more. The girls, they mean a great deal to me. And their father." The directness of his question caught her off guard. She met his gaze, saw the vulnerability there beneath the strength. "Their father is a good man," she said carefully. "A man I've come to respect greatly." Nathaniel set aside one crutch to take her hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from ranch work, but gentle in its touch. "I spoke with Donovan today," he said, "and Jenkins." Ruth tensed, trying to pull away, but he held fast. "I know who you are," Nathaniel continued. "Or at least I think I do. Abigail Morgan, the Angel of Winchester." Hearing her true name on his lips sent a shock through Ruth's system. Fear flooded her veins, fear of rejection, of exposure, of the danger that knowledge could bring. "If that's true," she said, her voice barely audible, "then you know I've lied to you." "You've used a different name," Nathaniel corrected. "But the woman who saved my daughters, who found me in the creek bed, who brought music back to this house, she's been real from the start." Tears welled in Ruth's eyes. "You don't understand the danger. If Gibson confirms who I am, what does Gibson want with you?" Ruth sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly exhausted by the weight of secrets. "My husband Thomas and I owned land in Virginia, adjacent to a property Governor Harmon wanted for a railroad venture. When Thomas refused to sell, there was a legal battle over the boundaries." She took a deep breath, the memories painful even after so many years. "We won in court, but 2 nights later, men came to our home." "Gibson's men," Nathaniel said quietly. Ruth nodded. "They set fire to our barn. Thomas went out to confront them. I heard shouting then." Her voice faltered. "A single gunshot. When I ran outside, he was lying in the yard, blood soaking his shirt. He died in my arms." Nathaniel sat beside her, his solid presence a comfort. "I'm so sorry, Abigail." That wasn't the end. The men said they'd be back. I gathered what I could and fled with Lawrence, our son, in the night. Ruth's hands trembled in her lap. It was raining. We had nowhere to go. Lawrence developed a fever. I tried everything I knew, herbs, poultices, prayers. Nothing helped. Your gift didn't work, Nathaniel said softly. Ruth looked up at him, startled. How did you— I've seen the way you touch the girls when they're hurt. The way your hand lingered over my broken leg. The strange peace that follows. His eyes held no fear, only understanding. You have a healer's gift. A rare thing, but not unheard of. It failed me when I needed it most, she whispered. I was a healer. I saved hundreds of soldiers, but I couldn't save my own child. Nathaniel's arm went around her shoulders, drawing her against him. That's not your fault. You know that, don't you? She shook her head. I should have done more, known more, tried harder. No, he said firmly. Some things are beyond our power to change. Even the greatest gifts have their limits. Some losses we simply have to endure. His words, spoken with the authority of someone who understood grief intimately, penetrated her defenses. Ruth Abigail let herself be held, let the tears flow freely, for the first time since she'd buried her son. Nathaniel held her until the storm passed, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring comfort. When she finally quieted, he tilted her face up to his. Gibson is after my land for the same reason the railroad. Now I understand why he's been asking about you. He's afraid you'll testify about what happened in Virginia. If he confirms who I am, he'll try to silence me. Abigail pulled away, wiping her tears. I've put you and the girls in danger by staying here. No, Nathaniel said firmly. You've given us life, and I won't let Gibson take that away. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. Jenkins brought me this today. It's a notice of a town meeting next week to discuss the railroad. Gibson will be there pressing his case. His eyes held hers. I think you should attend. That would be madness. It would be a stand, Nathaniel countered. You can't run forever, Abigail. Sooner or later you have to face the past. She knew he was right, but the thought terrified her. I've been running for so long. It's become a habit like breathing. You're not alone anymore. Nathaniel's hand found hers again, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture more intimate than words. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The promise in his words, the steadiness of his gaze gave Abigail a courage she'd thought lost forever. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. Nathaniel's eyes darkened. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb gently stroking her cheek. For a heartbeat, Abigail thought he might kiss her properly. Part of her, a part long dormant, hoped he would. But he only smiled, a tender expression that warmed her from within. Rest, he said, rising with the help of his crutches. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. At the door he paused. Good night, Abigail. Good night, Nathaniel. After he left, Abigail touched her cheek where his hand had been. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Not just the hope of survival, but of truly living again. Of perhaps finding love where she least expected it. Yet, beneath that hope lay fear. Gibson was a dangerous man, with resources and connections far beyond her own. If she stood against him, what price would she and those she had come to care for ultimately pay? The question followed her into uneasy dreams where shadowy figures chased her through endless corridors, and a small voice called for a mother who never came. The week before the town meeting passed in a strange limbo of ordinary routines and extraordinary tension. By day, Abigail, for, in her private thoughts, she had reclaimed her true name, continued her work at Whispering Pines. She taught the girls, managed the household, and helped Nathaniel as his leg slowly healed. By night, she pored over documents Nathaniel had shared with her: property deeds, railroad surveys, legal notices. The proposed railway line would cut Whispering Pines nearly in half, rendering much of the best grazing land useless. No wonder Gibson coveted the property. "He offered to buy me out last month," Nathaniel told her as they sat in his study reviewing maps. His splinted leg rested on a footstool, and though he still used crutches, he moved more easily now. "Triple the market value." "Why didn't you sell?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious. "It would have been the easier path." Nathaniel's blue eyes met hers across the desk. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built this house with his own hands. My father expanded the ranch into what it is today." He shook his head. "Some things aren't for sale at any price." "Gibson won't accept that," she warned. "Men like him never do." "Then he'll find himself facing an immovable object." Nathaniel's jaw set in a stubborn line that had become familiar to Abigail. "I didn't survive Antietam and Gettysburg to surrender my birthright to a silver-tongued snake in a tailored suit." Despite the seriousness of their situation, Abigail felt a smile tug at her lips. Nathaniel's fierce determination, his absolute refusal to be intimidated, kindled her own courage. "What?" he asked, noting her expression. "You," she said simply. "You make me believe we can win this battle." We pairs," he insisted. "We have truth on our side, and Gibson has underestimated both of us." Abigail wasn't so certain. As the days passed and the town meeting drew nearer, her anxiety grew. What if her testimony about Virginia wasn't enough? What if Gibson had already poisoned the townspeople against her? What if her presence put Nathaniel and the girls in greater danger? The night before the meeting, these fears drove her from her bed. Wrapped in her shawl, Abigail slipped outside into the garden. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn stars, sharp as diamond chips in the black velvet sky. She wasn't surprised to find Nathaniel already there, seated on the bench beneath the elm tree. Since his confession about his role as a sharpshooter, they had often met in the garden after the house grew quiet, sharing pieces of their pasts that neither had spoken of in years. He looked up as she approached, moonlight silvering his dark beard. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." Abigail sat beside him, drawing her shawl tighter. "Tomorrow changes everything." "Perhaps," Nathaniel's shoulder pressed warmly against hers, "or perhaps it simply reveals what's already changed." "You're an optimist." "I'm a realist," he countered. "And the reality is, whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." The simple declaration eased something tight in Abigail's chest. She had been alone for so long, running, hiding, surviving. The idea of standing beside someone of shared strength was both foreign and deeply comforting. Nathaniel's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with her own. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead. "I've been thinking about Catherine's music room," he said after a time. "How I sealed it away after her death, as if I could preserve her memory by keeping it untouched." Abigail squeezed his hand gently. "And yet, Sophie found her way there anyway." "Yes." He turned to look at her, his profile sharp against the night sky. "Children have an instinct for finding what they need, don't they? Sophie needed her mother's memory. You needed a home. I needed—" he hesitated. "I needed to remember how to live again." The naked honesty in his voice made Abigail's breath catch. "Nathaniel, let me finish," he said softly. "I need to say this before tomorrow, before whatever comes next." His eyes, dark pools in the moonlight, held hers. "You gave life back to this house, Abigail. To my daughters. To me. You were never truly dormant," she whispered, "just waiting for the right season to bloom again. As were you." His free hand rose to touch her cheek. "When I look at you now, I don't see a woman running from her past. I see a woman with the courage to face it." The tenderness in his touch, in his words, melted something frozen deep within her. Abigail leaned into his hand, closing her eyes, as his thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "not just of Gibson, but of hoping again, of believing in a future that could be taken away." "Hope is the most terrifying thing of all," Nathaniel agreed, "but also the most necessary." When his lips found hers, it felt like coming home after a long, arduous journey. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. But as Abigail responded, it deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. Nathaniel drew back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured, "remember this moment. Remember that you're not alone anymore." Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. For the first time since she'd lost her family, she allowed herself to imagine a new one herself. Nathaniel, Sophie, and Emma, bound not by blood, but by choice and love. It was a dangerous hope, a fragile dream. But as they sat together beneath the stars, hands clasped and hearts beating in unison, it felt possible. And that perhaps was the greatest miracle of all. The town hall of Frontier Springs was packed to capacity, with latecomers standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. The proposed railroad had drawn every resident from the wealthiest rancher to the humblest shopkeeper. Abigail sat with Nathaniel in the third row, her spine rigid with tension. She wore her best dress, a simple navy blue with a white collar, and had pinned her dark hair in a severe knot. Though she appeared calm, her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Nathaniel beside her was a steady presence. His crutches leaned against the bench and his legs still splinted, but healing well stretched out before him. Sophie and Emma had remained at Whispering Pines with Richardson, spared this public confrontation. At the front of the hall, a raised platform held a long table where the town council sat 5 men in their Sunday-best expressions, varying from excitement to trepidation. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers, called the meeting to order. "Citizens of Frontier Springs," he began, "we gather today to discuss a matter of great importance to our town's future. The Colorado Western Railroad's proposed line through our valley." A murmur ran through the crowd. The railroad promised prosperity, easier shipment of cattle and crops, increased commerce connection to the wider world. But it also threatened change to the town's quiet way of life. Mr. Everett Gibson, president of Frontier Bank and representative of the Colorado Western Railway Company, will present the proposal. Gibson rose from his seat in the front row and mounted the platform. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. His confident smile and commanding presence immediately captured the room's attention. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his rich voice carrying to the farthest corner, "today marks the dawn of a new era for Frontier Springs. The railroad brings progress, prosperity, and opportunity. It brings the future itself to our doorstep." As Gibson outlined the benefits, jobs during construction, increased property values, easier access to Eastern markets. Abigail studied the faces around her. Many nodded eagerly. Some, particularly the older ranchers, looked skeptical. The proposed route, Gibson continued, unrolling a large map, follows the natural contours of the valley, minimizing disruption to existing properties while maximizing efficiency. Nathaniel shifted beside Abigail, his jaw tightening. The map clearly showed the line cutting directly through Whispering Pines. Most landowners along the route have already agreed to sell the necessary easements, Gibson said smoothly. We offer fair, even generous compensation. Only one property remains. His eyes found Nathaniel. Whispering Pines Ranch. All heads turned toward them. Abigail felt the weight of dozens of stares, some curious, some accusatory. Mr. Hayes has thus far refused all offers. Gibson continued, a note of regret in his voice. His intransigence threatens to delay or even derail this vital project. Nathaniel rose slowly, balancing on his good leg. I'd like to respond to that if I may. Mayor Wilson nodded. The floor is yours, Mr. Hayes. With dignity, despite his injury, Nathaniel made his way to the platform. Gibson stepped aside, his smile never wavering, though his eyes had hardened to flint. I've lived in this valley all my life, Nathaniel began. My grandfather settled here when there was nothing but wild country and hope. 3 generations of my family have worked that land, improved. It cherished it. His gaze swept the room. I'm not opposed to progress, but I am opposed to theft disguised as progress. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. The route Mr. Gibson proposes is not the only possible path for the railroad, Nathaniel continued. There's an alternate route skirting the northern edge of my property that would serve just as well. That route would add considerable expense, Gibson interjected smoothly, and delay construction by months. A small price to preserve a family's heritage, Nathaniel countered. But there's more at stake here than just my land. He looked directly at Gibson. There's the matter of how far a man will go to get what he wants. The tension in the room thickened. Gibson's smile faltered slightly. I have a witness, Nathaniel said, who can speak to Mr. Gibson's methods in a similar situation in Virginia shortly after the war. He turned toward Abigail. Miss Walker, would you please join me? Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood. The walk to the platform felt endless, each face she passed a blur. She could feel Gibson's cold gaze tracking her movement, calculating, assessing the threat she posed. When she reached the platform, Nathaniel took her hand briefly, a gesture of support that gave her courage. My name, she said, her voice clear, despite her fear, is not Ruth Walker. My true name is Abigail Morgan. A collective gasp rose from the assembly. Gibson's face darkened. In 1866, Abigail continued, my husband, Dr. Thomas Morgan, and I owned a small farm in Virginia, adjacent to a property owned by Governor Harmon. When the governor wanted our land for a railroad spur, my husband refused to sell. Legal challenges followed, which we won. She paused, gathering strength for the most painful part of her testimony. One night, armed men came to our home. They set fire to our barn, threatened our family. When my husband tried to protect us, he was shot and killed. Her voice cracked slightly. Our son Lawrence caught fever as we fled. He died 3 days later. The hall was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on her pale face. What does this have to do with Mr. Gibson? Mayor Wilson asked. Mr. Gibson was Governor Harmon's business partner in the railroad venture, Abigail replied. He was present at the court hearings, and one of the men who came that night who gave the order to fire called the others by name. Gibson says no witnesses. A shockwave seemed to ripple through the room. Gibson stepped forward, his face a mask of outrage. "This is slander," he thundered. "This woman is clearly deranged by grief, inventing conspiracies to explain her tragedy." He turned to the audience, hands spread in appeal. "I was nowhere near Virginia in 1866. I have witnesses who can attest to my presence in Denver throughout that year." "Do you deny knowing Governor Harmon?" Nathaniel challenged. "I've had business dealings with him, yes. That hardly makes me party to murder." Gibson's composure returned, his voice smooth once more. "Besides, this alleged incident occurred nearly 20 years ago in another state entirely. What possible relevance could it have to our railroad discussion today?" Before Nathaniel could respond, the rear doors of the hall burst open. Samuel Jenkins strode in, waving a telegram. "Mayor Wilson," he called, "I have information pertinent to this matter." The pharmacist made his way to the platform. "This telegram arrived from Richmond this morning. It confirms that an investigation has been reopened into the death of Dr. Thomas Morgan and the subsequent land seizure." Jenkins handed the paper to the mayor. "Governor Harmon has been indicted for conspiracy and fraud." Gibson's face drained of color. "This proves nothing about my involvement." "Perhaps not," Jenkins conceded. "But this might." He withdrew a folded document from his coat. "This is a bank draft dated May 12, 1866, from your account in Denver to one James Reeves in Richmond. Reeves was one of the men who later confessed to setting fire to the Morgan property." A buzz of shock and speculation filled the hall. Gibson's eyes darted toward the exit. "There's more," Jenkins continued relentlessly. "Martin Donovan has been corresponding with his son in Virginia, who served with Mrs. Morgan during the war. He's gathered testimonies from soldiers, she treated documents proving her identity and reputation." He faced Gibson squarely. "And evidence linking you directly to the land seizures both there and here in Colorado." Gibson's mask of civility cracked. "You self-righteous fools," he snarled. "Do you think this changes anything? I still control the bank, the mining company, half the businesses in this town. Without the railroad, Frontier Springs will wither and die." "Not necessarily." All eyes turned to Dr. Turner, who had risen from his seat near the front. "I've been in contact with the Colorado Western Board of Directors," the doctor said. "They're quite interested in Mr. Hayes's alternate route, especially in light of certain irregularities in Mr. Gibson's land acquisitions." Gibson looked from face to face, seeking allies, but finding only suspicion and dawning condemnation. His hand moved to his jacket pocket. "This isn't over," he said, voice low and dangerous. With a sudden movement, he produced a small revolver. "Nobody move!" women screamed. Men ducked instinctively. In the chaos, Gibson grabbed Abigail's arm, dragging her in front of him. As a shield, the gun pressed to her temple. "We're leaving," he announced. "Anyone tries to stop me, she dies." Nathaniel stood frozen, helpless rage in his eyes. "Gibson, don't be a fool. You can't escape. Watch me." Gibson began backing toward the exit, keeping Abigail between himself and the crowd. "The stage to Denver leaves in 20 minutes. Mrs. Morgan and I will be on it." Abigail's mind raced. She could feel Gibson's rapid heartbeat against her back, the cold metal of the revolver against her skin. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but beneath it ran a current of anger at this man who had destroyed her family, who now threatened her chance at a new life. As they reached the door, Gibson's grip momentarily slackened. In that instant, Abigail drove her elbow sharply into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his aim wavering. She twisted away, but not before the gun discharged with a deafening crack. Pain blazed through Abigail's shoulder. She fell to her knees, dimly aware of shouts of running feet, of Nathaniel calling her name. Then Gibson was standing over her, the gun aimed at her heart, his face contorted with fury. "You should have stayed dead in Virginia," he spat. Time seemed to slow. Despite the searing pain in her shoulder, Abigail felt a strange calm settling over her. Her healer's instincts took command, and for the first time in her life she deliberately turned her gift inward. She closed her eyes briefly, concentrating. The warmth that usually flowed from her hands now radiated from her core, spreading through her body like golden light. Her consciousness expanded, allowing her to sense the bullet's path. It had missed major blood vessels by millimeters, lodging against her shoulder blade. Painful, potentially debilitating, but not immediately fatal. Focusing her energy on the wound, Abigail slowed the bleeding, eased the trauma to surrounding tissue, and dulled the fiery pain to a manageable throb. It was not healing. She couldn't remove the bullet or close the wound, but it was enough to keep her conscious and functioning when she needed it most. The entire process took mere seconds. When she opened her eyes, Gibson stood over her, his face twisted with hate. "I forgive you," she said clearly, looking directly into Gibson's hate-filled eyes. "And God forgive you, too." Gibson's hand trembled. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. Then a shot rang out. Gibson staggered, a red stain spreading across his white shirt. He turned slowly to see Samuel Jenkins holding a smoking derringer. "For my brother," Jenkins said grimly, "who died at Winchester while you profiteered from the war." Gibson collapsed, the revolver clattering from his lifeless fingers. The crowd stood motionless, stunned by the sudden violence in their peaceful town. Nathaniel was at Abigail's side, instantly gathering her into his arms. "Hold on," he begged, pressing his handkerchief to her wound. "Please, hold on." Dr. Turner pushed through the crowd. "Get her to my surgery," he ordered. "Now." As strong hands lifted her onto an improvised stretcher, Abigail fought to stay conscious. Through a narrowing tunnel of vision, she saw Nathaniel's face above her, heard his voice promising that everything would be all right. "The girls," she whispered. "Tell them—" Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. Abigail floated in a strange limbo between consciousness and oblivion. Occasionally she surfaced enough to register fragments of reality. Dr. Turner's concerned face, Nathaniel's hand clasping hers. Sophie's small voice asking if Miss Ruth would wake up soon. Pain throbbed in her shoulder, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always present. Fever came and went, in waves, bringing with it vivid dreams and memories. She saw Thomas smiling at her across their dinner table, Lawrence playing in the Virginia sunshine, wounded soldiers on blood-soaked fields. But increasingly, she also saw Sophie and Emma gathered around the piano, Nathaniel waiting for her in the moonlit garden. Past and possible future intertwined, reality and dream indistinguishable. Once she thought she heard Nathaniel praying beside her bed, his deep voice rough with emotion. "Please God, not again. Don't take her, too." Another time she felt small hands placing something on her pillow, one of Sophie's paper cranes, a wish for healing. She felt that familiar warmth flow through her body. But this time it seemed to emanate not from her hands but from the paper bird, as if Sophie's pure-hearted wish carried its own power. And always threading through her consciousness was the refrain of Amazing Grace, the hymn she had played in Catherine's music room. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Gradually, the periods of clarity lengthened. One evening, or was it morning, she opened her eyes to find herself in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a simple but comfortable space. She lay in a narrow bed, her shoulder heavily bandaged. "You're awake." Abigail turned her head to see Nathaniel sitting beside her relief, washing over his tired face. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days, his beard untrimmed, dark circles beneath his eyes. "Where am I?" Her voice was a rasp, her throat dry as sandpaper. "Dr. Turner's house," Nathaniel explained, helping her sip water from a glass. "You've been here for 5 days." 5 days. Abigail struggled to process this. "What happened? I remember Gibson, the gun." "You were shot in the shoulder," Nathaniel said grimly. "The bullet missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. Then the fever set in." He took her hand, his grip gentle but desperate. "We almost lost you." "Gibson." "Dead." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Jenkins shot him. Turns out Gibson had cheated. The pharmacist's family, years ago, took their land in Denver for another railroad venture. Jenkins had been tracking him ever since." Abigail closed her eyes, absorbing this. "So, it's over." "Yes." Nathaniel stroked her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "The telegram Jenkins brought was genuine. Governor Harmon has been indicted in Virginia. Your husband's name has been cleared, the property restored to your ownership." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "Too late," she whispered. "Too late for Thomas and Lawrence, but not too late for you." Nathaniel's voice was soft but insistent. "Not too late for a new beginning." She opened her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "The girls," she asked. "Missing you terribly. They've made enough paper cranes to fill a room." A smile touched his lips. "Sophie hasn't stopped talking since you were shot. She's been reading to you from her school books, convinced you could hear her." "I think I did," Abigail murmured, remembering fragments of Sophie's sweet voice threading through her fever dreams. "Dr. Turner says you can come home in a few days if the fever stays away." Days later, as Abigail's strength returned, Dr. Turner examined her wound with puzzled fascination. "By all accounts, you should have died," he said quietly, rebandaging her shoulder. "The blood loss alone, and yet the tissue is healing at a remarkable rate. Almost as if what Dr. Abigail asked, though she knew what he was thinking. Turner sat back, studying her face. "During the war, I saw thousands of wounds. I could predict with unfortunate accuracy which men would survive and which wouldn't." He folded his hands in his lap. "Then there were the cases that defied explanation. Men who should have died, but didn't. Most of them had one thing in common. They'd been tended by a certain nurse." Abigail remained silent. "I've always believed there are gifts in this world beyond our scientific understanding," Turner continued. "Healers whose touch carries something more than just medical knowledge." He smiled gently. "Your shoulder is healing at twice the normal rate, Mrs. Morgan. I suspect you've been helping it along." "I can't explain it," Abigail admitted finally. "It's something I've had since childhood. I can sense injuries, infections, imbalances in the body. Sometimes I can influence them, not cure, not heal completely, but guide the body's natural healing." "A remarkable gift," Turner said, "and one that likely saved your life." "It couldn't save my son," Abigail whispered, the old pain surfacing. "Even the most powerful gifts have their limits," Turner said kindly. "Some paths are fixed by a higher power than ours." He patted her hand. "Don't dwell on what your gift couldn't do. Think instead of all the lives it has saved, including, perhaps, your own." Nathaniel hesitated. "That is, if you want to come back to Whispering Pines." Abigail searched his face. "Is that what you want?" "What I want." Nathaniel's voice roughened with emotion. "What I want is to never again feel the terror I felt when Gibson's gun went off. Never again watch someone I love bleeding in my arms." The word love hung in the air between them, a declaration and a question. "I thought I was done with love." Nathaniel continued, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "After Catherine died, I sealed up my heart like her music room, a shrine to what was lost, rather than a space for new melodies." Abigail's own heart beat faster. "And now I understand what Sophie knew all along with her paper cranes. Every wish is a chance at new beginning." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her palm with reverent tenderness. "I love you, Abigail Morgan. I think I've loved you since you faced down my stallion on your first day at Whispering Pines." Joy, fragile but undeniable, bloomed in Abigail's chest. "I've been running for so long," she whispered, afraid to stop, to look back, to hope for anything beyond survival. "You don't have to run anymore." Nathaniel's gaze held hers, steady and sure. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. If that's what you want." The question in his eyes was unmistakable. Abigail reached up with her good hand to touch his bearded cheek. "What I want," she said, her voice strengthening, "is a home, a family, a place where broken things can be mended, where music can fill empty rooms, where paper cranes carry real wishes." "Whispering Pines," Nathaniel said softly. Abigail nodded. "Whispering Pines. With you, with Sophie and Emma." The kiss they shared was gentle but full of promise. Not a beginning exactly, for that had happened weeks ago in a moonlit garden, but a confirmation, a covenant between two souls who had found each other across a landscape of loss and hardship. When they parted, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be a mother to my daughters, a partner in my life." "Yes," Abigail answered simply. "Yes, to all of it." 1 year later, Whispering Pines bloomed with new life. The alternate railroad route skirted the northern boundary of the property, close enough for convenience, but far enough to preserve the ranch's integrity. The station, a handsome structure of red brick and white trim, bore a brass plaque, "Whispering Pines Station Est, 1886. The ranch house itself had been transformed. Fresh paint brightened the exterior, flower gardens bloomed where weeds had once grown, and Catherine's music room stood open, filled with sunlight and the sounds of children playing. On this particular autumn afternoon, Abigail sat at the piano, her fingers moving over the keys in a simple melody. Her left shoulder, where Gibson's bullet had struck, was occasionally stiff, but she had regained full use of her arm, a miracle Dr. Turner had called it. Sophie, now 8, sat beside her on the piano bench, carefully picking out a harmony. At 9, she was no longer the silent, solemn child Abigail had first met. Her dark eyes sparkled with intelligence, and her voice, once reclaimed, rang clear and confident through the house. Emma, 6 and irrepressible, danced around the room with her favorite doll, occasionally stopping to press random keys at the bass end of the piano, giggling at the discordant results. Abigail smiled at their antics. Her first months as Nathaniel's wife had been a learning experience for all of them. The girls had tested boundaries, worked through confusion about her role versus their birth mother's memory, and gradually accepted her as a mother in her own right. "Play the one about Grace again," Sophie requested, leaning her dark head against Abigail's shoulder. Amazing grace. Sophie nodded. It's Papa's favorite. Abigail began the familiar hymn, her fingers finding the keys without conscious thought. Emma stopped dancing to sing along in her sweet, slightly off-key voice. None of them noticed Nathaniel standing in the doorway, watching with a smile that softened his once stern features. Only when he joined in the singing, his deep baritone harmonizing with Emma's childish soprano, did Abigail look up. Their eyes met across the sun-dappled room, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. This family, this home, this love was what they had both been fighting for, each in their own way. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, Abigail and Nathaniel sat in the garden beneath the elm tree that had witnessed their first kiss. The evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "A letter came today," Nathaniel said, reaching into his pocket. "From Virginia." Abigail tensed slightly. Though Gibson was dead and Governor Harmon imprisoned for his crimes, Virginia still held painful memories. "The Morgan property has been officially restored to your name," Nathaniel continued, unfolding the document. "The lawyer asks what you want to do with it." Abigail was silent for a moment, considering. The farm where she had lived with Thomas and Lawrence, where they had planned a future where tragedy had struck, it had once been the center of her world. Sell it, she decided finally. Use the money to establish a scholarship at the medical college in Richmond, in Thomas's name. She turned to Nathaniel, her heart full. "The past has its place, but my life is here now." He drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy, Abigail Hayes?" The name still gave her a small thrill. After years of hiding, as Ruth Walker reclaiming her first name, while taking Nathaniel's surname, felt like the perfect balance of honesty and new beginning. "Happier than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "There are still moments when grief catches me unawares. A child's laugh that sounds like Lawrence, a medical text that reminds me of Thomas. Those moments never fully disappear," Nathaniel acknowledged, understanding in his voice. "Catherine still visits my dreams sometimes, as she should." Abigail took his hand. "Our pasts shaped us, brought us to this place, this moment. Without those losses, we might never have found each other." "God's mysterious ways," Nathaniel murmured. "Indeed." Abigail looked up at the stars, thinking of all the turns her life had taken, from Boston society to battlefield nurse, from grieving widow to fugitive, from housekeeper to wife and mother. I spent so long questioning his plan, angry at what was taken from me. And now I see that even in the darkest moments, I was held in the palm of his hand." She smiled, leaning her head against Nathaniel's strong shoulder. "Guided home, though I didn't know it at the time." From the house came the sound of soft crying, Emma likely having another of her nightmares. Before either of them could rise, Sophie's voice drifted through the open window, soothing her sister with the same lullaby Abigail often sang. "She'll make a fine healer someday," Nathaniel observed. "She has your gift for comfort." "And your strength," Abigail added. "Both of them do." They sat together a moment longer, listening as the crying subsided, and night settled fully over Whispering Pines. The peace they had fought for, suffered, for nearly died for it, surrounded them now, as tangible as the cool autumn air, and as precious as the love they shared. When they finally rose to go inside to check on their daughters and retire to their own room, Abigail paused to look back at the bench beneath the elm tree. So many conversations had happened there, so many confidences shared, so many wounds healed. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel asked, his arm warm around her waist. "That healing is never a straight path," she replied. "It circles back, takes unexpected turns. But with the right companions, she smiled up at him, the journey itself becomes a blessing. Nathaniel's kiss was tender, a benediction. Come to bed, Mrs. Hayes. Tomorrow is another day. Together they walked into the house where paper cranes hung from the ceiling of the girl's bedroom, where music filled once silent rooms, and where wishes after long and arduous journeys had finally come true. In the nursery they found both girls asleep in Sophie's bed, arms around each other. Emma's cheeks still bore traces of tears, but her expression was peaceful. Sophie had one hand protectively on her sister's shoulder, her dark lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. Nathaniel and Abigail stood watching them, their hearts full of a quiet joy that needed no words. This was their miracle, their redemption, not just the girls, but the family they had created together from the ashes of their respective losses. As they closed the nursery door and moved toward their own bedroom, Abigail thought of all the people who had helped them reach this moment. Martin Donovan, with his recognition and support. Samuel Jenkins, with his quest for justice. Dr. Turner, with his skilled hands and discreet silence about her past. But most of all, she thought of the journey itself, the unlikely path that had led a broken, desperate woman to the gates of Whispering Pines, and the man who had given her a chance, despite his own wounds and suspicions. "I love you," she whispered as they prepared for bed, the words still new enough to feel like a precious gift when spoken aloud. "And I love you," Nathaniel replied, drawing her into his arms, "more than I have words to express." As she drifted toward sleep in the circle of his embrace, Abigail's last conscious thought was of gratitude for second chances, for new beginnings, for the mysterious ways in which broken pieces could be gathered and remade into something beautiful and whole. In the palm of God's hand, she had found her way home.